Hi, everyone. Welcome to the farmer-led webinar for this month. We're very excited to be able to offer another live from the field webinar. We have Erica out in the field today with Matt and Kelby. And so just want to welcome you all here. Appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us this noon hour. So the just a quick introduction, the producer-led webinar series is just a collaboration between the UW Discovery Farms program and Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection to feature the good work that's being done in our Wisconsin farmer-led watersheds and to allow the farmers and partners to show us what's happening in the field. So today we are very happy to have with us Kelby Lechleitner and Matt Oehmichen. Kelby is a farmer and member of the Eau Pleine Partnership for Integrated Conservation, the producer-led group. And he's experimented with interseeding covers into 60-inch corn, as well as 30, 60-inch coupled test plots. This fall, he's actually grazing the cover crops with his beef cattle. And Matt, who's also an EPPIC member and a specialist at Short Lane Ag, will interview Kelby and share his own insights on the trials and other cover crop information from around the area. So with that, I think, Erica, I will send it over to you.
All right, can you hear us at home?
Yes,
I guess you can.
Great.
Oh, cool. Well, here I am with Kelby. My name is Matthew Oehmichen of Short Lane Ag Supply and the Eau Pleine Partnership for Integrated Conservation. And we're here on location in Marathon County near, well, what would you say, what city we're nearby?
Yeah, just north of Edgar.
That's a good description. And, you know, I don't want to take all of your thunder away. Kelby, why don't you kind of formally introduce yourself and then kind of describe your farming operation here?
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelby Lechleitner. I grow ginseng and raise beef cows now here. We started beef cows back in 2016 after my parents dairy farmed their whole lives. We sold the dairy cows in 2014, raised heifers for a few years, and then we started to move into the beef operation as we kind of found our way there. But yeah, so a lot to learn when we transitioned from dairy to beef, but we got going, and really how this no-till cover crop thing got started for us was we went to a conservation meeting that Matthew and Short Lane Ag put on here, and we learned a little bit more about mainly no-till because I'd seen some of the stuff he was posting online and I was interested in it. So I brought my dad along, and immediately after that, we converted our corn planter to a no-till, and we no-tilled this corn in here. But the issue that we had then, I think it was that same year, was we had that killing freeze, all the hay fields died out. And we were really concerned that we were going to be short on feed. And I remember that he had brought up the cover crops, how that was a vital part of, you know, the no-till system. So I called him up and I said, hey, does anybody ever graze these cover crops afterwards? Because I'm looking to get, you know, some more feed for my cows and last them a little more into winter. And he, I don't know, we basically kind of threw something together. I don't know, you called a lot of people, but so that was 2 years ago. And since then, we've been experimenting a little bit more with it. But yeah, it's been fun so far. I covered a lot of questions already, I think.
I was gonna say that took care of page 2 of the pre-typed interview questions done by Erica, who's holding the phone. Erica, you can say hi. Well, you can't because you don't have a microphone on you.
All right, guys, thanks for coming.
But you know, that was when I was driving over here, I was trying to reflect back what was the initiation of why we went that full measure, because most interseedings, especially in this area, are relatively conservative in their amounts. A lot of people want to do 15, 16, 18 pounds of interseeding. You get great biomass with that, depending on the species and the timing of it. But Kelby was really the first one that said, well, if we're going to push this for forage, we probably should have more. And I said, well, let's shoot for over 30 pounds an acre. And you know, out of the few people that were asking like for a similar rate, he was the one that said, yeah, sure, let's go forward with that. But yeah, this was all of your idea. I remember that. No,
I mean, I don't want to take credit for your good ideas, but I will.
Oh, hear that, Dad? Good ideas. Me.
finally made him proud, maybe.
I know. Yeah, something to hang my hat on. So yeah, so Kelby, you were saying that this is your second year corn rotation. Now, is this your only row cropping that you do on the farm? What's like most of your landscape management that you're doing right now on your tillable acres?
Yeah, so we farm about 250 acres. About 50 of that is mainly permanent pasture. And while we were kind of transitioning into beef, we didn't have that many animals, so we did do, we raised some barley, we did beans a couple of years because we didn't really need all that feed. But now we've transitioned a little bit back more to pretty much all hay ground except for this right here.
That you cut for forage?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we make a first crop off it. And then this year we started rotationally grazing our second crop, third crop into the fall. But yeah, this field here actually, before it was corn, it was beans. And before that, it was barley. And I can remember, so that was 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were out here with the baler, tires sinking in, and it was fairly dry. We had the head raised all the way up and we were kicking up mud chunks. It was just a pain. And then same thing for beans and same thing for corn the following year. Oh, maybe that was 5 years ago. We had corn on here and it wasn't that wet a year, but we had, 6 inches of mud and ruts and everything. And it was just a pain. And then that's why we went to the no-till and said something's got to change here. And since we've been doing that, it's only been 2 years of no-till cover crops, and we can drive a tractor, it can rain an inch, and we can go out here and sail right across it. It's pretty remarkable, actually.
Yeah, there was one this year. Kelby's very good at capturing moments. He always has that phone on him, and you have quite the skill set with taking photos and video. And there was one where he sent me one, and it showed his dad chopping the field. And during this time, I've been quite used to Kelby sending me multiple pictures. And I said, yeah, real great. And he said, no, look at the tires. And those tires were squeaky clean. And this was during a time where not only in my neck of the woods near Clark County, but also around by Kelby, everybody else was dragging mud onto the roads. And then they were spending the time to scrape that back onto the field.
Better in Marathon County. It's crown jewel.
Yeah. Well,
far superior than Clark County.
Well, there's much debate on which one's the crown jewel, but it's definitely between Clark or Marathon County, I would say. Now, when you were transitioning out of that dairy into the beefer operation, did you foresee that you were going to be implementing grazing wherever you could?
No, but as we've kind of grown our herd and we want to put a little less time into things. So for us, it was like, well, we can make all the feed, we can haul it back to the farm, we can put it in the silos, we can put it in the hay mow, we can feed it, we can haul the manure back out here, or we can just string up a wire and let the cows do most of that. So once we get our winter feed, the rest is pretty much grazing because it saves us time, resources. We don't need as much equipment, fuel costs, labor costs. So no, it's kind of an ongoing. We're learning every year as we go.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit more. You kind of touched on it, mostly with the labor savings. What are some other things you've noticed beneficial from having a system like this, where you're minimizing your disturbance, you're utilizing more forage through grazing?
As far as the land, or what are you talking
Anything.
about? Anything.
What comes to mind? What encourages you to keep doing this year after year?
The stuff that I see online and going through these field days, I see quite a few more people doing this, especially in our area, and it seems to really be benefiting them. And we've tried a couple different things. Like we tried bale grazing on hay fields in the winter, and that one hay field that we tested on last winter did really well this year. So just like things like that, and I don't know. Yeah, it just seems to be doing better. The soil looks a lot better compared to the ground that we, was first year cover crop corn compared to the one that on this half of the field. When you dig it up and you can see the soil and you can see how just a few years of no-till cover crop grazing, getting the animals back out there, has improved our soil, in 2 years compared to mud and ruts and
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just for the viewers at home, we will be hop, skipping and jumping out there. But we wanted to kind of get the meat and potatoes of what we have established here. So
Before we mess up Matt's hair.
why don't we go through that?
Huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Fire away.
When did you interseed and what equipment did you use and what was in the mix?
All right, that's what I was going to say. Why don't we go into that, because that's what probably everybody is most curious about. So Kelby, take it away.
So the first year, I think we probably interseeded like V3, V4. Probably it was a little later. I thought, because we scrambled to get that put together. And that year I just used a 3-point little spreader on one of our tractors, and Matt gave me the bags of mixes, and I just dumped them in, and I cruised up and down, and my rates were way off because I had to cover the field twice.
But
yeah,
it did get covered.
It did get covered, and it all got used. So no, I mean, nothing special. I just borrowed a 3-point spreader and threw the bags in and went. This year, we did it V2, V3 in between there.
Yeah. So Kelby applied. Well, it was around this time last year. This year, it was half the size. That corn was fairly short.
And this year we actually had short lane. They have a new air seeder. So we put it on with that to try it, because a lot of guys also want to add urea or whatever with that. And it's, you know, one less pass over the field if you mix those two together. We didn't put any on, but sorry, Matt, next year I might just do it myself again.
And that's fine.
But I think the biggest thing is the timing of when you get it on there and trying to get it before rain is what I've found. But as far as the species, there was...
Oh,
wait,
thank you.
Cheat sheet. Matt, you're supposed to have this memorized.
Yep. I thought I had it memorized, but
Here.
it's much easier to look at the paper. Oh, you want me to recite it?
And why?
Erica, how's this look if we post it like this?
We'll zoom in.
All right, so as you can see right here, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 9 different species in there. And you can see that the bulk of it that was made up with it was annual ryegrass, which we had like a blend of Italian ryegrass in there as well. We did 20 pounds of oats, nothing particular, you know, just like run-of-the-mill, medium maturity range oats. We did 2 pounds of medium red because we wanted to have some perennials come back firing through in the spring for continuous cover. We also did 3 pounds of crimson clover. That is my personal favorite. That is like that is the iron horse of interseeding mixes. If there's any species that ever fail, this is usually the one that's the last man standing. We threw cowpeas in there because we were chasing after maybe a little bit more leafy, a little bit more protein, and something that has drought tolerance and shade tolerance. And we also did something unique. We did 2 pounds of sunflower seeds because, you know, guys out west in the Dakotas, they like to implement that into rations for beefers for the extra fat that can be found in sunflowers. And we were looking for something that had a really big, meaty, fibrous root anchor of a system. And then we also had our 2 dashes of brassicas in there. So 2 pounds total. We had 1 of dwarf Essex rape and 1 of trophy rape. Trophy rape is kind of like a hybridized, where they took a brassica and mixed it with like a tuber. So you basically get really fibrous roots. You get great sequestering with the tuber, and you also get more leaves actually on top. And it's a little bit more cheap than dwarf Essex, but having those 2 together is what gives you that big leafy looking growth. So if anybody has been on our Facebook page and you see these interseedings where it's these big leafy things, that's the brassicas. And the brassicas are added in there because super fast, aggressive growth. They spring out of the ground right away. They canopy really well. And in a feeding scenario, that's kind of like the sprinkling of Doritos around the vegetable plate to get the kids to eat it. Even though it's mostly water, so it's going to basically drive through the system of that animal and doesn't give them the digestibility that you're looking for, but it has great energy. It has a great source of nutrition to it, but it's also that driver to help them scrape up everything else because they want to get at that big leaf. So they're going to pull up all that extra grass and the oats along there with it. And the oats was part of that too was we wanted to have that 30 pounds or more per acre, but we were chasing after a cost per acre range for Kelby, and the oats offered that opportunity because it's got super aggressive growth, fibrous roots. It does really well, actually extraordinarily well in canopy situations because it actually got headed out and it turned into straw, which will add a little extra fiber to it.
And I think this year's mix is only what, like 26, what was it saying, like $26?
Yeah, this was cheaper than last year's.
Yeah, this is only 26 bucks an acre.
Oh, and I forgot. Yeah, this was, zoom in on that beautiful bean footage. 38 pounds to the acre, so we're just touch under 40 pounds, and we had it at $26.50, which that kind of dispels one big myth with interseeding is that it's expensive. Even though this is another input that a farming operation has to worry about, it's not like this $40, $50 per acre that everybody assumed it was going to cost. But you can have, and once we get out there and we take a walk, you can have really, really thick cover, but not totally necessarily breaking the bank. And that was the other thing that Kelby mentioned here before is the only fertility inputs that they had on here was they had their animals graze on this for about 11 days until that terrible weather spell we had at the end of October, early November, where it was heavy rain and then it flash froze, and then it just made the conditions out there for having those animals trounce around just not great. So there was that, and then they added a little bit of corn starter to there. There was no side dressing, no urea spreading, nothing like that.
Yeah, and the cost input, I was looking at it last year, because nobody had hay, nobody had feed. And for us, it gave us 11 extra days of grazing. And if my cows are eating, 3 big square bales a day, they were selling for 100, 120 bucks last year. That saves me, it was like $500 some for the cover crop, $3,000 worth of hay. But, was that right? Was that math right?
Yeah, I agree with you.
But yeah, and then not only that, but like you said, it was wet. Things were starting to freeze, so not having to haul manure, not having to deal with all that.
If a tree falls in the forest, is there anyone to hear it? Yes, there is.
That's probably a deer. But yeah, it just, for us, it penciled out. Yeah, I don't think you need to be an expert. I have no half the stuff that he talks about, but I just take his word for it. I found somebody that kind of, it's still out if he actually knows what he's talking about or not. But no, just found somebody, and I said, hey, this is what I want to achieve. This is the direction we kind of want to head. What can we do? And then run with it.
Well, thank you, man. Well, you're the one that's making it all happen out here. That was the one thing is like when Kelby called the next day, he was kind of like in a frantic. He was like, I don't know if that went on right, because it definitely did go on right the first time. But then that first year for his interseeding, it turned out spectacular. And then second time in a row, this interseeding turned out spectacular once again. So yeah, you're kind of making it look, I was gonna say you make it look easy, but this is a process that he starts piecing together after the corn is off. Then we come up with a game plan in the dead of winter, and that is multiple texts, phone calls, and then finally, once it starts closer to the next season, then we kind of come up with a battle plan. And then even up until the last moment, we'll be making slight alterations of what kind of species we want to have on there, depending on what kind of weather we're facing or that we're expecting. But there's a lot of due diligence and a lot of work into it.
On his end.
That's absolutely right. But yeah, so I think the most critical thing with an interseeding, whether or not you're grazing it or if you're shooting for more biomass and great establishment, it's the timing of the interseeding. The earlier, the better. There was even one operation, we were working with a CAFO that's near Athens. They had some applied at VE, and that's at emergence. So they were just spiking out of the ground, and that is the best established interseeding that we've seen in this area. Well, next to Kelby's, obviously. But that just showed you that the earlier they put those on, the better that cover crop establishes. And the best part is we're just starting to get some of the results in from some of these silage trials that Jason Cavadini is doing over at UW Ag Research there in Stratford. There is no yield drag on any of these silage.
I was just going to ask you, does it affect the corn?
Oh, interesting you say that. So why don't we talk about So on the quality of the corn, Jason had information last year that showed that if you introduce cover crops, whether it's especially if it's in a no-till system, the forage quality increases, the quality of it. And in Kelby's case right here, and with the other spots that we pulled from in around Marathon County, the stuff that had the thicker, better established cover crop, especially if it was in the 60s, in the 60-inch row corn, the milk per ton or milk per acre was 2,000 to 5,000 pounds more. I'm just referencing that from memory from what I saw on that piece of paper, but it was exponentially higher for the quality. Because I believe on here, between your 60-inch row corn and your 30-inch row corn, there was a yielding of about 2 ton to 2.5 ton difference. But the quality of what the 60-inch row corn established with that thicker interseeding was far superior than what you saw in the 30-inch. So maybe that'll be the next thing I'm gonna ask. Why did you do 60-inch row corn?
YouTube. No, I was, you go down those YouTube wormholes, and I was watching grazing videos, and then, you get into cover crops, and then there was 60-inch row corn, and I know they're doing that down in was it Iowa or South Dakota somewhere, and I don't know if it was me or you or somebody asked if we'd be willing to try it, and I said, well, it can't hurt, right? And better to try it now while our numbers are down a little bit from cows to when we have more animals and we need more feed. So what the heck, let's try it. So we try, let's do the 60-inch rows, and then we were talking about, okay, well, as we're chopping that corn, because the thing was, we drive over all that cover crop, we knock it down.
Yep.
A little worried about that last year, but the cows picked it up. It wasn't an issue. So with 60-inch rows, we have a 2-row corn chopper. Are you gaining that much? Obviously in between, but it's still a time thing, right? Same passes.
2-row chopper, only cutting 1 row at a crack. Yeah.
So then we did some twin, we did 230s together and a 60-inch row, 230s together, 60-inch gap. And that seemed to work good. My dad said he liked chopping that, but we don't have a fancy corn planter. So that was a lot of Kelby running around, moving seed boxes. And, so that was fun. But yeah, it was something to play around with and try. And there's not a ton of people that do that in our area, I don't think. So why not try it one year?
Yeah, because this part of the strategy and part of I'll use the word hype with 60-inch row corn is that it's the goal of maximizing the growth of that interseeding, because the biggest challenge with establishing a really good interseeding is the canopy takeover of the corn and how much sunlight is actually getting to that plant. Because you can have species that have shade tolerance, but sometimes it can get a little bit too much and they get a little bit strung out for sunlight. You get a lot of top growth, but you don't get a lot of root growth. But in the 60s, you get full sunlight penetration onto the ground. So you'll get a robust plant on top, but you get the full root system capabilities underneath it. And then also is to have the solar
Big words.
The solar corridor, as they call it. Each plant is getting full access to sunlight. So if you picture it, it's just like the concept with why we went from drilled beans to 30-inch row beans is better air circulation and more of that plant, more of the leaves getting access to sunlight that they don't have to struggle and fight for it. That's the same concept with corn. Maybe 30s, we're packing them in too tight. They're not getting all the sunlight that they need. And that's probably what brings on a little bit more disease. That brings a little bit more stress to that corn. But if we bounce them out a little bit, they get more sunlight, they get more access to the nutrients in the soil, especially with that cover crop helping sequestering and building biology. You'll get a healthier looking plant. And so far in the early stages of the data collecting that Mars has been getting, that has absolutely been the case. So it's really interesting. But I like the twin row 30, especially in your case. That just logistically, that makes a lot more sense.
Can you repeat them so they can hear me? The first one is anyone doing water quality samples in the area, particularly on this field?
Is anybody doing water quality samples, particularly in this area? That's an excellent question. I don't know that one, but that's why we have Discovery Farms working with us, because maybe future trends down the road, we could definitely get to that. But that brings up a really good question, because you know, there's initiatives going on. Like I know Trouts Unlimited is sending out kits to anglers that they will allow them to do in-stream testing of the water. Right now, there's a strategy being formulated is could we do something like that for farmers where we have like a dipstick test to test out for that. But as of right now, we're not having any specific water quality testing.
Next question is, what's next year's strategy for interseeding? Can you repeat it?
What is next year's strategy for interseeding into his corn or just in general?
I think for Kelby's strategy.
All right, Kelby, what are we doing?
We're going to do, I think, kind of the same thing. One thing that we brought up at the field day was like you were talking about with, was it solar tunnels? Pretty technical. This field has always been east and west planted, and next year we're going to try going north and south to get more sunlight in there. See what that does. But next year I'd like to see maybe a little more rye. I don't know if it was just the parts of the field that I've seen.
Rye grass?
Yeah. But yeah, I think it'd be a lot of the species that we use have been similar. You know, we changed the trophy rape a little bit because a little more leafier, but we'll make that call 10 days before. I don't know.
Well, I guess if I was going to field that question, especially after hearing what Kelby wants to do, the reason he wants to have more annual ryegrass is because it has aggressive growth, but what we've been seeing in interseedings is it's kind of like a slow starter, but once it's established, it really explodes, especially if it gets great access to sunlight. But that's also where that's the biggest driver for best digestibility and nutritional values for the forage. So we're at 7 pounds, going up to 3 more pounds, up to 10. That's really not that much more money. So that would be something that we would cater to, and we would probably back off maybe a little bit like on the clovers. I wouldn't want to drop any more than 2 pounds per acre on medium red because I want to see some of that persist and come firing back in the springtime to capture the sunlight, to keep a living root in the ground and keep feeding the biology. I personally would like to see more of a grass forage. So anything between like either we would crank out like a little bit more oats, maybe instead of 20 pounds, we go up to 30. Maybe we could try introducing maybe like a sorghum sedan grass, or maybe doing a Japanese millet. The Japanese millet was kind of like an intriguing idea, but you're smiling. Is that something you're not?
We'll see. Matt always likes to, bounces a lot of ideas out and then explains why.
and then I see if it sticks. But I guess like the goals that I'd like to see is I'd like to push the envelope more of like, what if I increase that small grains and put that out there into that field? And then I'm almost tempted to either want to try to back off the brassicas to see if I can get more leafier growth, you know, if they had more spacing, or if I want to up that because the brassicas do fairly well.
I also, like you said, about seeing something come back in the spring. That's something that we had talked about too. If we graze them earlier like this, could we still get something in the ground where next spring we could run the cows over it before we plant corn or something like that?
And medium red presents that opportunity, especially at 2 pounds, because you basically, it's going to be like salting an egg kind of look. It's not going to be super green and thick, but when you stand there, you'll see medium red clover plants all over the place. And it doesn't take long for once they start hitting sunlight, they really start firing out.
A little salt and pepper.
Yeah, well, peppering is more of like do.
Kind of like that hair.
Yeah, a touch of gray for men. That's what this is.
Touch of gray, is that what that is?
Yeah.
How old are you? 25?
Oh, I'm older than that. You know, I'm pushing mid-30s now. I'm turning into the silver fox. That's what this is right here.
All right, we have another question about your herbicide program. Can you talk about your spring herbicide program before interseeding?
Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
This will be a good one. Oh, repeat the question. The question was, what's the herbicide program for establishing an interseeding cover crop?
Yeah, so we just did 2,4-D and glyphosate. We tried something this year because the north half of this field last year was oats and oats and then oats and peas. I think we did maybe even one more round of oats and peas. And this year, this spring, it came back very green. A lot of clover came up.
Very green.
And it was almost like a hay field where like all of a sudden it just exploded. We were going to plant corn and we're like, should we graze it? Should we just no-till right into it? And cut back on cover crops? What should we do? And then Matt bounced around some ideas and he said, we should probably burn that down a little bit. And we did, but not enough. Because,
too late.
Yeah. We found that not a lot of our cover crops, it's hard to find any of that. And I think it hurt the corn just a little bit, but now we know.
Yeah, so that's the biggest hurdle. And anybody in the chemical or ag industry would tell you that getting a good established interseeding is a herbicide program, because anybody could come up with a good weed control, all season long weed control program, relatively cost wise and application wise. But when you're talking about suppressing weeds and getting a living crop out there, that gets a little bit challenging. So as of right now, Roundup and Verdict are two popular items, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the Roundup. The two approaches that people generally will do is they do an aggressive burn down, they torch everything off, and that corn is coming through, and then you interseed right away. Try to smother out any kind of emerging weeds with your faster growing interseeding companion crops like your clovers, your brassicas. Try to shade them out, outcompete them. Another approach is you use Verdict. Verdict, that's from BASF. That's a pre-emergence spray product that has a very low residual. It's only within a few weeks that it's going to have a residual that will keep any emerging weeds at bay, but it's not going to ding the interseeding. By the time the interseeding starts getting a little bit bigger, that herbicide is starting to wane. So it's almost like hand in hand, it works really good. But from field to field, it can be very, very altered. If you have a seed bank it's very weedy, the Verdict will take care of about half of the weed pressure. And if you have like a low interseeding rate or an interseeding that doesn't take and doesn't get that fast aggressive growth, you're going to have weeds that fire through. Or in another field where that could be the opposite, the Verdict just keeps everything clean all season long. And then the industry, the chemical herbicide industry, is trying to come up with new measures. They're trying to basically jam pack decades of research into a narrow window, because they see that this is the next level, this is the next direction, and they want to try to come up with a herbicide program that doesn't hurt your brassicas, your grasses, and stuff like that. But yeah, the herbicide program seems challenging, but once you understand like how the dynamics of your field works, whether you have to do a burn down, a pre-emergence, or a pre-emergence with that burn down with Verdicts and glyphosate or another burn down agent, you can get ahead of it. So it's not that hard. How did that sound? Was that pretty good?
It was over my head, but yeah.
Is there any research on relative feed value, protein content, and rate of gain of feeder steers?
With the interseeding? Oh,
Yep.
I got to repeat what you're saying. I can't remember.
Research on relative feed value, protein content, and rate of gain on beef feeder steers and Angus and Angus cross.
Okay, so not on Holstein. Is there any research being done where you can see any kind of weight gain? Is there relative feed value? All that kind of stuff. Well, they're going through that right now, not just with this field, but several other fields. They're testing the RFQ of the interseeding. And Jason Cavadini sent me some of those results this morning. So on average, throughout the different systems on the 60-inch row corn, on that interseeding, the relative feed quality is in the anywhere between 150 down to 140. And then anything in the 30s, it cranks down to 100 down to 90. So we're still in a great level for RFQs on there, but it showed that once there was more space for that interseeding to really take off and established its root system to get more nutrients into that plant, that RFQ shot through the roof. And going towards the other part of like, do we notice any kind of weight gain? I don't know if we don't really have that part of the research aspect of it. So I guess it'd be more observational on your
You guys can see
end.
the cows in a little bit and tell me how they look.
But that would be a really good discussion. I would say though, that if somebody was looking towards having a grazing scheme and doing with finishing, I think that would be more of a great fit with rotational grazing on perennial cover. Because on something like this, I don't think you can necessarily throw all your eggs into that basket of like, well, I'm going to finish these cows out on the interseeding and the corn. Basically what this system is offering Kelby right here is that this is taking a lot of the cost inputs of labor and trafficability out of the equation and allowing him to streamline this field. And he, by letting those animals graze out there, drop their loads, the urine and the manure onto that field, and also allowing him to have his equipment going across there, having continuous coverage, and allowing him to do continuous corn without any kind of soil degradation and any loss of nutrients, so that he doesn't have to keep pounding the fertilizer to it and he can back off of that. He's not necessarily looking at this as like, okay, this is where I fatten him up. This is just him maximizing his effort on these acres right here. So I guess in that sort of sense, I hope that answers that.
Ideally, if I could wean all my calves and then run the cows out here where there's not so much of a need for that, more so just extending their grazing before we got to go into winter feed is ideally where we would like to be. But as far as looking at our calves and how they respond to it, I think they look great. These last couple of years, they've really been putting on pounds come fall.
That's awesome. I dig that. You know, one other thing too is like when we were traveling out there, they're all kind of congregate in that area where all that interseeding is still vibrant green, and they're taking all that biomass out, and they're not really piling up against the fence waiting to get rotated to the next thing.
Yeah, and I will say we have pretty much almost one of everything, but
one of everything.
A lot of Hereford. We had some Charolais, Angus, and now we've been breeding everything Angus, moving more towards Angus. There are a couple dairy crosses that we got from the neighbors. We like to keep those around just because they're easy to get some milk out of if you have a trouble cow in the spring. But no, our cattle seem to respond great to it.
That's awesome.
Were you happy with the 60-inch corn yields versus the 30-inch corn?
Were you, Kelby? I gotta ask you something. And somebody also happened to ask it from their mobile device.
Yeah.
Were you happy with your 60-inch row corn versus your 30-inch row corn?
I like the way it looked. Like if you walked on the 30-inch rows and you go over and compared to a 60-inch row with a higher population, it's taller. It looks a lot more filled out. I don't know. We don't necessarily weigh tonnage and all that. We're pretty. That's for the
They're
science
pretty
guys.
easy going. I guess on my end, I love the way that, like what Kelby said, I love the way that the interseeding responded in 60s. I love the way that the 60-inch row corn, especially, this is a variety that this is a dual purpose. This is an 85-day corn. This is from Legend Seeds. This is a 47J 185. This is, so being a dual purpose, it's more on the grain side, but this will make good forage feed. It's a semi-flex corn, and the ears filled out really well. It really responded when you give it that extra space. The one thing that we need to keep working on though is rates. What is the sweet spot for planting rates so that we can try to narrow that gap of like 2 or 3 tons per acre loss? Could we narrow that down more, or can we basically get it the same even? So we're still trying to figure that out, if it's hybrid placement along with populations or if it's populations per acre.
Slowing down the planter through that thick grass.
Yeah.
Before we walk over the field, you guys touch a little bit on your EPPIC group, talk like just about how it came about, what collaboratively are you working on?
So they can't hear you talking, right? You know, I just thought of this, Kelby.
I don't want to speak on behalf of Matthew Oehmichen here for EPPIC and Shortland Egg, but I will say, I'm just kidding.
The floor was yours.
No, I was going to make a statement on behalf of you.
We'll get back to him in a moment. But Kelby, you know, before we walk out there and we start getting like down to the nitty gritty of all the eye candy out there, why don't we talk a little bit about the watershed group that we're a part of? So the Eau Pleine Partnership for Integrated Conservation, otherwise known as EPPIC, that started a few short years ago. It's a community-led watershed group, or a farmer-led watershed group. And basically the goals and aspirations of the watershed group is to look at enhancing the ag industry in Marathon County, keeping our communities, I was gonna say safe, but healthy, not just water quality wise, but what kind of quality of a product can farmers get out of that field. And basically trying to stem this tide of this sudden flux of soil erosion that we've been seeing. You know, because recently in the last decade, the landscape of Wisconsin and you can pan that way. Do it, Erica. All the way over there. So the landscape of Wisconsin mostly used to look just kind of like this. You had a lot of perennial cover, a lot of hay ground, a little bit of corn, you know, just enough to fill the silo for silage and to do high moisture corn, or maybe to sell some grain. And then you also had a lot of small grains implemented in those rotations. You know, when we were little kids, it was still like that. But now within these last 10 years, you have a lot of row cropping being established. You have a lot of dairies selling off their herds, and other dairies getting larger because of that. And then the guys that had the milk cows, you know, if they don't go to another kind of livestock, they just go to row cropping. So you have a lot of exposed soil, and that's basically why we're seeing this big rush of soil erosion and water quality issues happening, just because the dynamic change. For instance, in the 90s, you'd be lucky to see anywhere between 8 to 10% of Wisconsin being planted in soybeans, but that has grown to, I believe, 50 to 60%. It has grown exponentially higher. And then perennial cover dropped by 15%. So you're having a lot of less cover. And then silage production went up, man, by a lot. Basically, Marathon and Clark County lead the world in silage production. Nowhere else in the world, Brazil, Russia, nowhere can you find an area where they make more silage than around here. So the dynamic of like how our dairies forage needs have been established, when people aren't doing dairy farming and they're doing cash crop farming, the rotations kind of changed up. So at EPPIC, we're trying to bridge that gap. We're trying to find that divide, and we're trying to bring that together where can we take what our agriculture systems are now, but can we get more implementation of the conservation so that we can get back to that level where we didn't have such soil loss and such bad water quality, and we can have our farms be profitable, right? Was that good? Oh man, I really dig that. Well, should we take a jaunt over this way? This is it Olson? Gentry? Erica Gentry is the one that's running the phone right now, and she's doing a fantastic job, because obviously you can't see her, but she's walking with an iPhone and the mic pack is basically dangling off of the attachment there. Can you let us know if the wind gets a little bit too thick for everybody, because then we can bring it closer to our mouths. So if you want to glance down real quick as we walk past through here, you can see some of this interseeding as we're coming through here. So the main species that you're kind of seeing as you're walking, you're seeing the annual ryegrass, and you're seeing a lot of the clovers, the medium reds and the crimson. The crimson is an annual clover. In case you do not know, that means that this will not fire back up thick in the spring. Some may come back depending on how mild the winter is, whereas the medium red, that is all going to come firing straight back through. And here we go. So one thing that I always like to say is,
Oh, windy, get over there.
should we, oh, you want to stand right here? Ooh, this is better. One thing I like to say is that you can always judge a farmer or an agronomist by the size of their shovel when they go out to the field. So we're all set.
I thought it was agronomist when you threw that farmer in there.
I did at the last minute. We had a script change. Well, your shovel's bigger than mine.
Bigger
Okay.
Scoops.
Yeah, bigger scoops. Well, anyway, I kind of like to use that one though, if I can. Or unless you want to take a shovelful.
I need something to lean on.
So do we want to look at the soil profile, or do we want to keep talking species?
Let's do some soil.
All right, real cool. So if we go in here, oh my
The farmer
goodness.
Matt just disappears into a field and comes back 10 minutes later. Look what I found.
Yeah, if anybody knows me well, I'm never without my shovel. And any field walk that we go to, I always walk into there. But yeah, so here's what his ground profile basically looks like. So obviously the first thing that people see is the earthworm. That's not uncommon to see in a system like this where you have this cover crop super thick on top. Now, the reason that you want to, well, no, I'll go into that later. Let's keep talking about this. So you can see down the whole entire way, this piece is basically holding itself together. We're not seeing any kind of extreme kind of plating. And the best part is when you take that off of there, you can see that this has really good stability, and we got that really good aggregate building going on. And here's the other cool part. And you can kind of see that at my pinky there. You have fibrous roots, really fine roots all the way down on this chunk of soil. Why is that important? This is full access throughout the whole soil profile. Most cases on a conventional system, from compaction, from tillage, you'll see that there'll be a break line right about here. This will all be nice and fluff, but then the roots kind of struggle from this point and they don't get the drive like they should all the way down. And then this gets blocky, this gets tough. The corn doesn't get full access to all the nutrients and water that it has to get optimal yield. But you can see on here, that's not the case in point. It's not blocky. It's got that nice cottage cheese to it. And this basically, this is the magic trick. And the great thing about conservation implemented practices in an ag system is you get this nice loose soil and you get all this root drive going straight down, but yet you don't have any of your equipment sink into the ground. That's what the really cool part of that
So if
is.
somebody were to just do no-till, what would they see?
Oh, excellent question, Kelby.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see this a lot more. Ugh. If you start getting to like straight no-till, I'm starting to see this, especially guys that started doing it 6 years ago, and you don't do any kind of adaptive rotation, meaning you don't incorporate like a hay ground into it, you don't put small grains to it, and you just do corn beans, it's going to turn into a brick. Basically, you don't have the diverse kind of cover. You don't have covering for the soil. You don't have different kind of root systems interacting with the biology under there, creating more root channels, creating more flow for water. And the worms can't just do it enough on their own. And that stuff will be like a cinder block. And then the compaction doesn't just stop here. It comes all the way up to the top. That's why, like when they talk about no-tilling or minimizing disturbance in the soil health principles, they mention continuous cover, living cover, and armor for the soil in most of those principles. And that's why you want to have those go hand in hand in no-tilling. So if you're at home watching this video and you're like, I'm going to start doing something different. No-tilling is an easy step to take, but keep in mind, if you don't introduce diverse cover, any kind of cover cropping scheme, whether it's after the corn is off or after the beans are off or in interseeding, or if you're not introducing other kinds of root systems into that ground, you're going to be going the other direction.
So essentially in the no-till system, the cover crops are the tillage?
Oh, yes. Roots, not iron, is something that people will say, is that you let those different root systems, fibrous, deep channeling, tuber, what have you, do all the tillage for you. Create all that aggregate stability, create all that pore space, let the water flow through, and all that jazz. The other cool part, let's see here. Just look at all that cheddar at home, folks. See that? You have continuous channels, gaps, little aggregates, roots, worms, they're hiding from us. There he is. Throughout this whole entire thing. Now, from a business standpoint, you got to be happy with that, because soil isn't just a medium. It's not a sterile plane where you got to pound the screws to it. This is what makes you the money. This is what allows your corn to do well. This is what allows your beans to do well. This is what allows your animals to make you money too. So if you have a system like this where you don't have to worry about pooling up water, you don't have to worry about adding so many nutrients each year, it's all good stuff.
And you notice a lot more water retention than runoff these last 2 years.
Yeah, because like
when you came out here to take those samples, you're like, why is the ground squishy?
yeah.
It rained an inch here last night. Did it not rain by you?
Yeah, that's true. So like I came out here to get forage samples for that research study, and I had my muck boots on because I was expecting to get really mud and sloppy, but there was like no mudslide out here, and it was just a little bit soft. But like I wouldn't feel like I would ever get my truck stuck out here.
We chopped later that day, so.
Yeah, that's true. He was one of the few that were actually chopping that very day. So you basically can get on your field faster in those systems. Springtime, or at harvest time. So one thing I wanted to go in between, is this enough, Erica? All right. So next thing I want to talk about is, I'm going to go super nerd on you here. What your interseeding kind of coverage should look like. So, I mean, basically you can go anywhere. Erica, come over here. Come on. Point down. No, right here. Point down. So what are we seeing? All right. So what you're seeing here is it's very hard to see any kind of dirt. Would you agree, Erica?
Yep. Pretty covered.
This is what your interseeding, this is what B+ grade A interseeding looks like. If you look straight down and it's very hard for you to see any kind of bare dirt, that's what you're looking for. Most interseedings, you'll see that it looks green when you look down the row instead of straight down, because you'll see a few plants here and there. That's okay. But what an interseeding is supposed to do is build biomass, not only living biomass, but also residue biomass, which is what we're counting on what these oats are going to do. Well, whatever oats are left over from the animals. So like if we dig down, deep down in here, you can start seeing that some of those oats are starting to die down, starting to drive down. Why that's important is that this is building residue. In the forest floor or any kind of hay field, biology out there and the ground is really primo. Not because there's green stuff on top, because there's residue that's continuously feeding the biology, keeping this ground insulated and covered. So that is what the next level of interseeding that I want to see. And that's why I want to do more. That's why I want to do more small grains. It's because I want to build on that residue. We already know what's going to grow green and what's going to grow thick, but can we find that interseeding species that's going to keep continuously building up on that residue? Because we basically want to take the properties and the capabilities of what an undisturbed piece of ground and a forest floor have, but apply that to an agricultural system. You know, basically where if you clear cut a woods, stuff springs out. Nobody's going into a woods and dumping urea or potash down. It springs up on its own because of the network and the synergy of the different microbes, the fungi, the bacteria, and all the other different plants. There's such a storehouse of mineralization going on. So can we mimic that same kind of concept onto a field practice? Now, the one thing that, can you hear me at home okay? Maybe we'll go this way a little bit. Ah!
And I'm very impressed with your hair gel.
I know, me too. So real quick though, I know the one thing that a lot of people will point out is, well, Matt, you're in the ag retail business. Why are you talking about reducing inputs? And can we really expect that? In a forage heavy system like Clark County and Marathon County, where you're feeding dairy, where you're feeding animals, the one nutrient that is going to be hard to replenish through a regenerative means is going to be like with potash, because there's so much tissue removal. But at the same time, from a retail standpoint, if a farmer is running out of money and unable to buy the inputs, then we're not sustaining our business practice either. And if this is what is going to be the most approachable, most regenerative way for agriculture systems, then this is something that we have been embracing, is to maximize profits of our customers, right? Yeah.
One important question from the audience too: are you having fun?
Are we having fun?
Yep.
Somebody asked that from home if we're having fun. I'm okay.
I think Matt has fun all the time.
Are you having fun doing conservation?
Oh, are we having fun doing conservation?
I have to see him more, so I'll let you guys decide.
We see each other way more often now. I would say that there's days where it gets a little tough because, you know, there are challenges on the road that you're on, you know, because a lot of people would say this system doesn't work, this will never make any money. Or if you try to reach out to legislators like at the state or federal level and you want to show them what farmers are doing before they go ahead and do any kind of restrictive mandates or new kind of like implements of law to restrict the kind of farming they want to do, that part gets a little frustrating. when you want to have these people who are lawmakers come out and see the great work that farmers are doing. But otherwise, this year and last year, there's a lot of bright spots in this direction of doing conservation. And the stuff that tickles me pink with conservation is seeing all the multiple different things that are growing and seeing how that reacts with the soil. And then also the fun part is when you get to hear great stories like Kelby was given, where you go from ruts that are several feet deep to all of a sudden you just blast right across it. That's the part that makes that a lot of fun.
I would rather see that than us having to go out there and disc it and drag the soil finisher across and deal with all the mud.
Yeah, no joke. Well, as we're moving towards the animal, did I answer the question, Erica?
You almost talked for an hour already. This is what happens when you get a podium.
Did we really talk for an hour? Holy buckets!
If we what? I do. I think they do a lot better when they're out grazing and walking as opposed to, you know, standing around a bunk eating. They're a lot healthier. They perform a lot better, which is why we're going to do a lot more of that bale grazing in the winter too, because otherwise they just get fat.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like there's nothing neater looking than actually seeing how you can see these animals out here. They're content. There's some that are laying down. A lot of these animals aren't really scrounging around for feed. They're kind of just moving down the row really gradually. And, you know, just remembering my days of being on the dairy farm, if I had ways of lessening me shoveling out pits and hauling manure out, I would take it in a second. You know,
You actually shoveled out pits?
I did so much work on the farm. I'm telling you.
How many acres do we do?
Yeah, and what's your total acreage?
Our total acres is about 250 acres. About 50 of that is permanent pasture, and just 30 acres of corn.
You can see that one. Oh, he just got done whipping a corn stalk.
I can tell you though, if I was in a big operation where I did row crop, I would definitely try to do some cover crops and run animals on it.
Yeah, for sure. Try to get some of those nutrients, because, you know, I remember there's a researcher from South Africa. He said that most of your nitrogen comes from the urine, and urine is generally the hardest thing to get from the facility out into the field without getting lost or diluted. And you couldn't ask for a better measure than having them just do it directly onto the field, I would say. I guess last thing before we wrap up, you know, you can glance down this road or this row, and you can see some of the sunflowers that sprung up right there. They didn't get the thick, robust growth like I wanted to have. So that's the one thing I'm kind of like bummed out about. So we are kind of in talks of whether they want to try to do sunflowers in row with the corn, or if that's something that they might be thinking of skipping. But I think for now, you guys are thinking about doing it in row, aren't you?
That's something we had talked about, yeah.
Yeah, and then if you come on this side, generally this is how big that rape can get. And it can range of like how thick some of that interseeding is. You know, like if the grass or clover is in thicker one spot, the rape will be a little bit smaller. But if you give it enough room to grow, this is a kind of nice growth that you get. And I don't know, where is it? And they offer a really good root system to it. So not only do you get the big gnarly roots, but you get all this really, really fine, very small fibrous roots, which make that, help break that soil up really, really nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of those. And they don't taste too bad either. Slightly bitter, but it's still savory.
I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I don't know. I can't believe we talked for an hour. We thought 20 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to shut the microphones off. But I think we're gonna wrap it up from the field here. So I'll pass it back over to Amber and Rachel.
Thanks, guys, for a super informative and interesting discussion. I know they can't really hear me, maybe, but I do appreciate you sharing all that with us, Matt and Kelby. You're a wealth of information. Great job trying to make these things work. And I did have one question about CCA credits. We haven't applied for them specifically for these webinars. Maybe that's something we could investigate in the future, but feel free to reach out to me or Erica if you have any further questions. We'd be glad to also get you hooked up with Matt and Kelby if you came up with more questions for them. So for now, from Discovery Farms and Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection, and also the Eau Pleine Partnership for Integrated Conservation, we thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time.